Take a deep breath now. Let it in slowly, hold it for just a moment, and as you exhale, feel the weight of the day melting away. Notice the way your shoulders soften, the muscles in your face letting go. Your eyelids growing just a little heavier. With each passing moment, there is no need to do anything at all now. Only to listen, only to feel, only to drift. Feel the softness of the pillow beneath your head, the warmth of your blanket hugging your body. Let every breath guide you deeper into stillness. Gentle, safe, hell. Now our story begins. Our story tonight begins in a quiet valley. Far away from the clamor of cities and the roar of trade routes, this valley is wrapped in green hills, cloaked with wildflowers and winding paths of river mist, and nestled among these gentle folds of land is a stone convent. Ancient and weathered, known to few, but cherished by many, it is called Lee Handel, the Valley of Light. The convent has stood. For hundreds of years, its foundations were laid with prayers, its stones carried by barefoot pilgrims, its bells cast by the hands of villagers who believed that the sound of a bell could call the spirit closer to heaven and here, under the vaulted skies of the Holy Roman Empire. The sisters live in peace and silence. The year is 1147. It is early spring, and the world beyond these hills stirs with crusades and courts, with power and pain. But within the convent's walls, there is only song and study and the soft pulse of sacred time. Saint Hildegard, though she is not yet a saint, walks the cloisters with slow and listening steps. Her long robes gather dew from the garden's edge. She is known not for her rule, but for her visions, visions of spiraling light, of singing stars, of divine harmonies that awaken the heart and hush the mind. The sisters call her Sibyl of the Rhine. The church listens, though not always with understanding, but in the valley. Her word is like lantern light, small, steady, and bright each evening as dusk touches the convent stones. The sisters gather in the garden. They walk barefoot on the soft grass, warmed by the day's sun. In their hands, they carry lanterns made of reeds covered in thin oiled parchment inside. A tiny flame flickers, not strong, but enduring. These lanterns are not merely for light, they are for healing, for in her visions, Hildegard saw light not just as fire, but as spirit. She believed that certain tones and colors could soothe the soul, and that light, true light, could mend what had been broken in the heart. The ceremony is simple. The sisters hum in unison, low, wordless, a tone that vibrates gently in the chest, and as they hum, they breathe into the lanterns, not with force, but with intention. They whisper prayers into them, prayers not of asking, but of offering. I give this peace. They say, I give this kindness, I give this breath. Then they place the lanterns upon the garden's pool, a still round basin shaped like a chalice. Lined with white stone, the lanterns float, their lights dancing on the surface, and the garden becomes a sea of stars that night. There is a new novice in the convent. Her name is Anselma. She is small, with a braid too tight and fingers that tremble. She has come not for the calling, but for the quiet her village burned 2 winters ago. Her voice has not returned since, but her eyes still search for wonder. Hildegard watches from the cloister archway. She sees Anselma place her lantern on the water, and though the child says nothing, her silence is a song all its own. The flame flickers once, then steadies. Later that evening, in the scriptorium where the sisters copy prayers and herbs and songs, Anselma lingers. She runs her fingers over the inked pages of Hildegard's Physica, a book not just of medicine, but of spirit. In it are recipes for balm made of rosemary, incantations for singing illness to sleep, and notes, always notes of light. Color is the soul's language, Hildegard once wrote, and music is its breath. And so the child begins to draw. She cannot speak, but she draws the lanterns one by one in ink, in gold leaf. She paints the silence that had lived in her chest since the fire, and night after night, her lanterns glow a little brighter on the page. One day, the abbess finds her in the scriptorium, a beam of morning light spilling across the page. She does not speak, but she kneels beside the child, and together They turn the page to begin anew. The seasons pass. Gently spring folds into summer. Then autumn paints the orchard red in the convent's garden. Bees hum and the thyme lavender hangs in bundles from the rafters, and the lanterns. The lanterns? They float now not just in the pool, but in the dreams of every sister, in the quiet corners of the heart where words cannot reach. And one evening, when the wind was still and the dusk was soft, and Selma places her lantern on the water, and before it drifts she. Whispers not in words, but in breath, in song. It is the first sound she has made in 2 years, a single note, clear, small. Like the bell that hangs in the garden archway, rings across the water, and Hildegard, listening from her cell, smiles. She writes in her vision book that night, "A new light has entered the world, not mine, but hers." And from that day on, Selma becomes the keeper of lanterns each evening. She teaches the other girls to breathe calm into the flames, to light not with fire, but with intention, and the light never fades. The days in Lehantal pass not in hours, but in harmonies. The sun rises to the sound of vespers and sets to the hush of footsteps on worn stone. There are no clocks, only bells and the breath of sisters in prayer. On Selma now moves like water through the cloisters. Her silence is no longer empty. It is full of rhythm, full of color, full of presence. Other novices gather near her in the garden. Each dusk they wait for her signal, a soft touch to the wind chime hanging from the cypress tree. Its sound is not loud, just a high note, a single shimmer in the air, and then they begin. Each novice holds her lantern to her chest. Each one closes her eyes. They breathe in deeply, then slowly breathe out into the flame, as if giving part of their spirit to the light. The reeds of the lanterns creak gently. The parchment glows with a golden pulse, and Aunt Selma walks among them. She does not speak. She does not need to. She holds a small satchel. Inside it are petals from white roses, time-wrapped in linen, and salt from the convent's own. Well, she sprinkles a pinch into the pool before each floating to the sisters. It's a custom to Aunt Selma. It's a blessing. The lanterns float a little longer when she does it. The nights grow cooler. The hills are brushed with frost. Smoke curls from the chimneys, and inside the kitchen, warm bread is torn and shared, but the lanterns still glow, and the singing grows. It begins with one sister, then two. Then, all of them, they hum as they breathe into the flame. No words, just long, low tones, a sound like wool being combed or snow falling on stone. They call it the healing note. Tanned, though no physician comes to the convent. No apothecary tends them. The sisters are well. Their aches grow fewer. Their dreams grow sweeter. Hildegard watches all of this from her writing cell. Her visions are returning, not as before with spirals of fire and towers of light, but quieter now. Like candle smoke curling into thought, she sees Aunt Selma's silence as sacred. She writes in her severes, "There is a language deeper than the tongue. It moves in rhythm and breath and light." One day a messenger arrives from Mainz. He is tired, dusty, wearing the mark of the archbishop's seal. He brings a scroll for Hildegard. She reads it slowly. The emperor's court is troubled. There are murmurings of unrest. The scholars are divided, they argue, over doctrines and dates, over stars and saints, and above all, they are restless. Hildegard is asked to return to preach, to remind the court of harmony, to remind them of divine order. She does not answer right away. Instead, she walks to the garden. She finds Aunt Selma kneeling by the lantern basin. The girl is drawing again this time. Not lanterns, but faces, smiling eyes closed, resting. Hildegard kneels beside her. The grass is cold, but the moment is warm. She places a hand over Aunt Selma's, "Tes," and speaks softly. "I must go for a time." Aunt Selma looks up. There is no fear in her eyes, only stillness. "You must stay." Hildegard whispers, "You must keep the light," and Aunt Selma nods. The next morning Hildegard departs with 2 sisters and a mule cart. She carries scrolls, ink, a vial of rosemary oil, and a lantern lit by Aunt Selma herself in her absence. The convent becomes even quieter, but not in a sorrowful way. It is a silence filled with purpose. In Selma keeps the rhythm. She tends the garden, she presses oils from the herbs, and every evening she lights the lanterns. She teaches the youngest novices to make the reed frames, to mix the clay pigment for the gold paint, to tie the fine threads that float them gently on the water, and soon something begins to change. Villagers from nearby begin to visit at first. Just a few, a farmer's wife with a sick child, a shepherd with aching joints, they come to sit by the lantern pool. They listen to the humming, they breathe with the sisters, and then they sleep right there, in the garden on stone benches wrapped in till wool. They say the dreams are kind here, that even sorrow feels safe. Word spreads. Night's widow arrives from the next valley. She brings nothing but her grief. She kneels beside the pool. Anselma hands her a lantern, and though her hands tremble, she breathes into it and floats it gently on the surface. The light catches her tears, and something softens in her. She stays 3 nights. And when she leaves, she is not healed, but she is held. The lanterns are not magic, but they are made with intention. And in the medieval mind, that is often enough. Each lantern now carries not only breath, but herbs, pressed rose petals, tiny scrolls of prayer tucked into the base. Some hold lines of scripture, others hold nothing but a name, names of those who have passed, names of those who cannot speak, names of dreams that have not yet come true. Anselma becomes the keeper of these names. She writes them in a vellum-bound book, 1 name per page, surrounded by painted vines and stars, and silence. The abbess watches all this with quiet awe, and one evening as the moon rises pale over the hills, she approaches Anselma and places the book in her hands. "You have become our scribe of light," she says. Though Anselma still rarely speaks, she smiles, and in that smile there is music. Winter comes quietly to Lee Huntel. It tiptoes over the hills in a hush of frost, blankets the garden paths in white lace, and wraps the convent in a deeper kind of silence. The pool is covered now with a skin of thin ice, but the lanterns do not stop. The sisters place them on wool-draped trays and leave them beneath the apple trees, where the light glows on snow like stars. Caught sleeping inside the cloisters, the air smells of juniper, and wax fire crackles low in the hearths, and the chanting continues even softer now, as though not to wake the snow. Stells the garden still, though most of it sleeps beneath the frost. She gathers winter herbs, angelica, chamomile, bay leaf, and dries them over the kitchen stove. She tucks small bundles of them into the base of each winter lantern, saying nothing, only breathing gently and watching the smoke rise slowly toward the rafters. Letters arrive for her now, scrolls wrapped in ribbon, carried by messengers and monks, some from Hildegard written in her sharp, curling hand, others from strangers, titled simply, "To the girl of the lanterns." They send small stories of sleep found in hard places, of grief made bearable through the hum of light. Some send coins, others send feathers, some send nothing but thanks. Anselma reads them all. She does not answer in ink, but she answers with lanterns. Each one is a reply, a breath, a light placed in the night on their behalf. By midwinter, the convent hosts a gathering, a vigil of silence, villagers, travelers, even a nobleman's child carried on a litter. They all gather by the frozen pool. The sisters walk among them with warm mulled wine, soft wool blankets, and baskets of lanterns, each with a string to hold and a slip of parchment to breathe in. To know one speaks only. The snow falls, and the fire crackles nearby. Each person lights their lantern from the hearth, carries it gently to the hilltop above the garden, and places it into the wind. It is a silent festival, a festival of peace. The sky is clear, that night stars blink awake one by one, and on the hill 100 lanterns rise on the breeze, some carried by strings, others held by hand, their flames dancing like prayers. Unspoken, Anselma stands at the center. She does not carry a lantern this time. She is the lantern Hildegard returns that spring. Her robes heavier with age, her hair now silver, but her eyes still light. She finds the convent change, not louder, not grander, but deeper rooted in silence and soft joy. She walks the garden paths and sees the painted stones the novices have left. Each one a symbol, a star, a herb, a name. She meets Anselma in the scriptorium. The girl is not drawing, she is writing not in Latin, but in symbols of her own, a language of breath, of tone, of gesture. Hildegard smiles. "You've created your own chant," she whispers, and Anselma nods. Later that summer, a sickness touches a village down the valley. The sisters go not with potions, but with lanterns. They light them in the village square. They teach the children to hum as they breathe, and though the fever does not vanish, the fear eases. People sleep again. They speak more softly, and the nights are calmer. Anselma remains in Lehantal. She never takes vows, but she becomes known as the Silent Abbess, not because she rules, but because she holds the light. She walks the valley roads, sometimes carries a satchel of reed lanterns, leaves them in windows, in wells, in the crooks of trees. And some say when grief is heavy or fear presses on the chest, if you light a candle and breathe into it slowly, Anselma's spirit might drift near, not to speak, not to heal, but simply to stay, like warmth, like peace, like sleep. And so the tradition continues. For hundreds of years, passed down in hushed songs and village tales, they say, in the Valley of Light lanterns once taught the world to breathe. And if you listen softly enough, you might still hear the hum, not from lips, but from the heart, from the quiet rhythm beneath all things, and from the girl who found her voice not in sound, but in silence. The years moved like soft waves across the valley, never crashing, only rolling, only folding gently into each other. Convent at Lehantal grew not in size, but in presence. Its name traveled by whisper, by pilgrim, by dream, was no longer only a haven for the sisters, but for anyone whose heart had grown tired of noise. They came in cloaks of wool and linen, with cracked feet, with old wounds. Some carried heavy silence, others carried a single hope. Wrapped in cloth, they were not asked questions. They were only handed a lantern. It did not matter who they had been before, only that they were here now, in this place. Among those who had chosen light, the ritual remained the same simple, unchanged breath into flame, flame to water, water to silence. But now the ritual echoed. It reached beyond the stone walls, into villages, into distant keeps, even across the sea. Lanterns, made by Anselma's design, found their way onto ships, into abbeys, into prisons and kitchens and fields of the sick. They were not masked, not sold, only given, each one handmade, each one sacred. Some called them peace lanterns, others called them Hildegard's breath, but most simply called them the lights. There was one lantern made of reeds dipped in wine resin, painted with crushed violets, tied with a silver thread, that made its way into the hands of a dying poet. He had once written for courts and kings, but in his final days he wrote only of quiet. When he lit the lantern beside his bedside, he whispered not a prayer, but a promise: "I will go gently." And heeded. His final verse was found on the parchment tucked within the lantern's base. It read, even in darkness, "I am cradled by flame." The sisters heard of this. They wrote his name in the vellum book and drew beside it a quill wrapped in vines. Another lantern, small and golden, traveled with a young mother through childbirth. She had lost 2 children before, and could not find peace in prayer. The midwife lit the lantern beside the bed, and the mother held it her breath growing steady with the flame. The child was born beneath its glow, and the mother named her Lux. Light years past, Lux grew, and when she was old enough to walk, her mother brought her to Lehantal. There the sisters welcomed her with open arms. Lux walked through the lantern garden, touched each stem of rose and mint and thyme, and stood by the pool. The same pool Anselma had once knelt beside. She asked for no lesson. She simply breathed. Hand the wind stilled Anselma now with silver in her braid. Watched from the cloister, she knew the light would go on. She began to teach Lux, not with words, but with rhythm, with gesture, with tone. Together they created a new chant, a harmony of breath and silence. They called it Lumen Vita, light of life. It was sung not in churches, but in meadows, in kitchens, by those who had no choir, only a heartbeat. The chant spread, woven into lullabies, into herbal recipes, Into cradle songs and death rites alike. One winter a plague touched a city not far from the valley, not a great one, but enough to steal breath. The sisters sent lanterns wrapped in bundles of rosemary and salt. They sent chant scrolls and bottles of lavender water. They sent no sermons, only presents. And slowly the plague easy doctors were confused. Scholars debated, but the people knew the lanterns had carried more than fire. They had carried common. The convent garden and Selma and Lux lit one lantern for each soul lost, one for each recovered, and one for each healer who had not slept. The pool shimmered, and for the first time in years Aunt Selma spoke aloud. Her voice was soft like dry leaves brushed by wind, but it was clear. "Peace does not ask for understanding," she said. "It only asks to be held." The sisters wept gently, not for sadness, but for how long the silence had lasted before the sounding. The years that followed, Aunt Selma wrote her own scrolls, not in Latin, not in poetry, but in symbol. Each lantern she made carried a mark. Each mark meant something: a spiral 4 deep, rest a circle for protection, a line for grief that was not yet ready to be spoken, a star for dreams waiting to wake thee. Symbols were passed down. Lux memorized them, then painted them, then taught them to others. They became part of village stonework. Etched above doors, carved into well stones, pressed into wax seals, sent with letters of love. Aunt Selma watched all this, never proud, only grateful. She spent her evenings in the chapel, not praying aloud, but sitting beside the flame, sometimes humming, sometimes simply breathing. She no longer needed to lead. The light moved on its own. And so one spring evening, when the wild violets bloomed along the garden wall, she lit her final lantern. She sat by the pool, placed it on the surface, and whispered her last breath into it. Then she closed her eyes and slept. She was not buried. She was wrapped in linen and placed in the garden earth beside the cypress tree, where the wind still sang through the chimes. Her lantern, still burning, was placed on a small altar in the cloister. It flickered for 7 days, then went out, but the warmth remained. Lux became the keeper. Then others, after her, the lanterns continued, not as relics, but as reminders that peace could be made, not found, that silence could speak, that light could be held on, that even now, far from that garden, if you sit quietly and breathe and hum and let your fingers rest gently beside a small flame, you might feel it to the hush. The warmth, the rhythm beneath all things, the light that never asks, only offers. Time passed, but it did not pass quickly, and Lehontelet moved like a wind over tall grass. It moved like the ripple of water after a pebble has dropped, slow, soft, patient. The convent did not change much. The stones remained where they had always been. The bells still rang. The lavender still bloomed along the southern wall, but within the hearts of those who lived and passed through it, there was something new. Memory, a rhythm, a calmness that was no longer tied to just a place, but a practice. They called it the offering of breath. Began each evening, as always, with the lanterns. Now the novices carved the frames with care, not just of reeds, but of willow, ash, elm, each one chosen for its season, its meaning, its mood. They bound the parchment with thread spun from wool and flax, dyed with elderberry and oak. The flames within were small but not weak. They flickered, but they never faded. Sister would place her lantern at the foot of a person's name written in the garden scroll, not just the sick or sorrowful, but the joyful, to the pregnant, the returned, the forgiven. And in this way, light became a gift, not just for healing, but for celebration. One evening, a young girl named Cyrilda arrived from the mountains. She was no novice. She came from a village where the stars were so clear they seemed to whisper. She had never known a convent, only winds and snow and silence. But she carried with her a small lantern made in the same style, though slightly misshapen. When asked where she had learned it, she simply said, "From a traveler with silver hair. She gave me this and told me to breathe gently into it each night, and I would always be home." The sisters knew Aunt Selma had once walked the mountain roads. They welcomed Cyrilda, taught Her not with rules, but with song and silence, she stayed and in time became a weaver of lantern cloth, delicate, translucent. Touched with pale dyes from flower and stone, her lanterns became known for their dreamlike hue, like dawn mist caught in the shape of flame. Villagers came asking for them not in desperation, but in hope for marriages, for newborns, for long journeys ahead. Lantern was now more than light. It was a ritual, a message, a practice of Karen. The convent archive Lux had begun, recording the stories not in books but in scrolls, tied with soft twine stacked in cedar boxes, each marked with a symbol, a rose, a tear, a flame. A spiral inside each scroll, a short tale, a shepherd who lit a lantern for his lost sheep and found them. Sleeping beside it in the hollow of a tree, a widow who lit one on her husband's birthday and dreamed he was brushing her hair beside the fire. Just as he once had a young boy who lit a lantern before his first steps into apprenticeship, who said, "Later it was like someone was walking beside me, even though I couldn't see them." These were not miracles, not in the way the world knew miracles, but they were enough to bring sleep, enough to soften sorrow, enough to light the path through difficult moments. Lux grew older. Silver touched her hair just as it once had on Selma. She no longer walked to the cloister each evening, but she sat at the arch watching. Young novice would bring her a lantern lit and warm. She would breathe into it once and send it out into the night, and that, she said, was all she needed. Now one winter a traveler came, not for light, but for sound. He had heard of the chant Lumen Vitae. He had not slept in many years without waking in fright. He believed his soul had grown noisy. He came to sit in the chapel during evening chant. He did not hum, only listened. He returned the next day, and the next, and the fourth night. He asked to join the humming. He placed his hand to his heart and breathed slow, steady, soft. Afterward, he wept. He said, "It's the first time the noise in me went quiet." The sisters welcomed him, not as a convert, not as a patient, but as a witness to what breath and stillness condoned. He left, carrying 3 lanterns, one for his journey, one for his mother, one for the man he had once been. Spring returned again. The hills bloomed with thyme, and wild rose bees drifted between petals. Children ran through the orchard paths with soft ribbons in hand, and the light, always the light, flickered gently in the garden basin. Some say when night falls on the convent, if you walk the garden path slowly, with no shoes and no hurry, you may see a figure sitting by the pool, braided hair, lantern in hand. She does not speak, she only hums, and in that hum you feel not afraid but found.